She thought she was buying a sickly stray pup for $1, just enough to keep it from freezing to death on the mountain road. But as the creature grew, so did the strange, unsettling signs that it wasn't a dog at all. And the day she finally understood what she had been raising, everything changed. The morning Mara found the pup, the mountains were unusually silent, no wind threading through the pines, no ravens calling across the valley. Silence, in a place that lived and breathed through sound, always meant something was coming. She had gone into town with nothing more than a grocery list and the faint hope that her loneliness would feel lighter among strangers. Instead, she left carrying a trembling bundle that weighed almost nothing, yet felt like the heaviest choice she'd made since the day she decided to stay in these mountains for good. The seller didn't look her in the eye. He smelled like stale engine oil and regret, and he pushed the puppy toward her with a roughness that made her flinch. $1. Take it and go, he muttered, like the animal was a burden he couldn't wait to lose. Mara hesitated. She didn't need complications, didn't need responsibility. But the pup lifted its head then, two pale blue eyes meeting hers with an ache she recognized too well. Abandonment, fear, hope wrapped in exhaustion. She set the coin down without another word. Driving back up the mountain road, she kept one hand on the wheel and one hand resting gently over the towel-covered lump beside her. Every bump made the tiny creature whimper, a soft, breathy cry that cut straight through her chest. "It's all right," Mara whispered, unsure whether she was soothing it or herself. The pup nuzzled closer, as if clinging to the warmth of the first kindness it had known. Something unspoken settled between them, a fragile thread weaving itself into her life before she had time to question it. Her cabin felt colder than usual when she stepped inside, though the fireplace still held the faint memory of last night's flame. Mara knelt on the rug and unwrapped the towel. The creature lay there stiff and trembling, its fur a strange mix of ash gray and white, like frost caught mid-melt. She expected the fragile bones of an underfed dog, but the paws were too large, the muzzle too sharp, and the ears too pointed for anything she recognized. "What are you?" she murmured. The pup blinked slowly, as if the answer was too large for words. Days passed with a gentleness she didn't expect. Mara fed him goat milk and tiny portions of soft meat, warming each meal by hand before offering it. The pup grew stronger, but not in the way a normal dog would. He watched everything with a strange stillness, listening to sounds she couldn't hear, reacting to shadows she couldn't see. At night, he slept curled against her ribcage, heartbeat quick and fragile. She named him Ash, not for the color of his fur, but for the way he seemed to rise from something burned, refusing to disappear. Her neighbors, those who still lived this high, warned her without hiding their concern. "Stray pups don't survive out here," one woman said, scanning Ash with narrowed eyes. Another man shook his head. "That's no mountain dog. Leave it outside. Don't let wildness inside your home." But wildness was all Mara had ever known. She'd grown up surrounded by silence, storms, steep cliffs, and the lessons only solitude teaches. If the animal was unusual, then maybe it simply belonged to the same kind of untamed world she did. By the third week, Ash had doubled in size. His legs lengthened, his shoulders broadened, and his coat thickened into a dense armor of winter fur even though it was early autumn. He moved with a fluid, cautious grace, one that didn't belong to any domestic breed she knew. Still, he stayed close to her, following her everywhere, chopping wood, checking traps, repairing the broken fencing around the property. His devotion was quiet but absolute, like he recognized her as something more than a caretaker, as if she were his pack. One evening, as storm clouds bruised the sky, Mara stepped outside to secure the shutters. A sudden gust hit her like a shove, sending a ladder crashing to the ground. Before she could react, Ash hurled himself between her and the falling wood, taking the impact across his back with a sharp yelp. Mara dropped to her knees immediately, panic clawing her throat, but he shook himself, stood, and nudged her hand as if to say, "You're safe. That's what matters." She wrapped her arms around him, the warmth of his body startlingly steady. That night, the storm raged like an angry god clawing at the mountains. Lightning forked across the sky, illuminating the cabin in bone-white flashes. Ash lay beside her, completely unbothered by the chaos outside. Mara stroked his fur, tracing the shifting patterns of gray and white, and felt something beneath her fingers. A scar, long, thin, and far too clean to be an accident. Someone had tried to collar him. Someone had tried to claim him. But the mark wasn't human-made. It looked older, sharper, as if carved by nature itself. She dreamed of forests filled with fog, of pale eyes watching her from the tree line, of a howl echoing across the valley, with grief so deep it shook the ground. When she woke, Ash was standing by the window, staring into the darkness. His tail was stiff, his ears forward, muscles tense. Mara joined him, scanning the tree line. Nothing. But the feeling lingered. Something had passed through the valley that night. Something that knew Ash's scent. Something that remembered him. Weeks turned into months. Ash's growth didn't slow. It surged. By midwinter, he was nearly the size of a small bear, though his movements remained gentle around her. His eyes had shifted from pale blue to a luminous gold that glowed faintly in moonlight. Mara found herself speaking to him more than she spoke to any human, telling him about the life she'd left behind, the people she'd loved and lost, the reason she'd chosen the mountains. He listened, always, like he understood every word. Sometimes, she caught him staring at her with an emotion she couldn't name, something beyond loyalty, beyond gratitude, something old, recognition maybe, as if he was waiting for her to realize something she had missed. But Mara brushed off the thought. She had enough mysteries living inside her own chest. She didn't need another wrapped in fur and golden eyes. Still, the nights felt less lonely with him, and the world, though still bruised by her past, seemed to breathe easier. One afternoon, while hiking along the ridge, Ash stopped abruptly, hackles rising. Mara froze. The snow ahead lay smooth, untouched, except for a set of claw marks gouged deep into the ice, massive, deliberate, and unmistakably fresh. They didn't belong to a bear, or a cougar, or anything she had seen in all her years. Ash lowered his head, sniffing the tracks, then looked back at her with a soft whine. Whatever owned those claws was looking for him. Mara felt a chill ripple under her coat despite the winter sun. That night, she barred the doors, checked the windows twice, and kept the rifle loaded beside her bed. Ash paced near the fireplace, unable to settle. Every creak of the cabin made his ears flick. Every gust of wind made him rumble a warning. It was the first time she'd seen fear in him, and something else too. Guilt. Like the danger wasn't approaching her by accident, like it was following him. When she finally drifted into sleep, it wasn't rest, just a thin veil over growing dread. She dreamed again of fog and eyes and a howl that split the world in half. But this time, the vision changed. She saw Ash as he truly was. Not a puppy, not a stray, but something shaped by the wild itself. something that belonged to the deepest parts of the mountains. She woke, gasping, heart racing, sweat cooling on her skin. Ash sat beside her, staring with that same ancient recognition. Mara rose at dawn, deciding she needed answers. She packed food, fire-starting gear, and a small axe for clearing ice. Ash followed without hesitation. The mountains stretched before them in a gray-blue expanse, quiet, endless, waiting. She had walked these trails for years, but now every ridge and shadow felt unfamiliar, as if she had stepped into a version of the wilderness that existed just beneath the surface of the one she knew. They reached the ridge where the claw marks had been. Fresh prints now dotted the snow, circling, approaching, retreating, like something massive was pacing, watching, deciding. Ash positioned himself between Mara and the tracks, head low, breath visible in thick white puffs. The wind carried a scent she didn't recognize, musky, metallic, primal. "Show me," she whispered. Ash moved forward. The trail led them into a narrow pass carved by centuries of wind. The walls towered above them, jagged teeth of stone biting into the pale sky. Halfway through, Ash stopped again. Ahead, something moved, slow, deliberate, heavy. Mara's pulse thundered in her ears. A shape emerged from the fog at the far end of the pass. 4 legs, massive shoulders, fur as white as snow and striped with silver. Not a wolf, not a bear, something between myth and flesh. Ash didn't attack. He stood still, tail low but not submissive, gaze locked on the creature. Recognition burned between them. The giant beast lowered its head, emitting a low, echoing call that vibrated through the pass like thunder softened by distance. Ash answered. One long breath that wasn't quite a howl, wasn't quite a growl. Mara watched, breathless, understanding dawning with terrifying clarity. They weren't strangers. They were the same. The creature stepped closer, stopping a few meters away. Its eyes, luminous gold, mirrored Ash's. Mara felt her world tilt. Ash pressed against her leg once, soft and trembling, as if apologizing. Then he stepped forward, no longer her frightened dollar pup, but something older, larger, destined for a life she could never follow him into. The mountains had come to reclaim him, and she realized with a shattering ache that letting go was the price of loving something wild. For a long, suspended moment, Mara stood between them, the life she had built and the wild she had accidentally invited into it. The air in the pass felt charged, every breath fragile. Snowflakes drifted slowly, catching on Ash's fur and the giant creature's shoulders like fragments of passing time. Ash glanced back at her once more. In his eyes she saw the pup who had whimpered in her passenger seat, the shadow who slept against her ribs, the guardian who took a falling ladder for her. Then he stepped away, each movement deliberate, as if walking back into a story older than hers. The larger beast turned, leading Ash deeper into the mist. Their paws left dents in the snow that looked like punctuation marks on a white page. Mara wanted to call him, scream his name until the mountains shook. Instead, she stood in silence, fingers curling into fists inside her gloves. The pass swallowed their shapes, leaving only gray distance. The echo of their low, unearthly sounds lingered long after they were gone. The sky felt bigger, emptier. Her chest did too. She stayed there until cold seeped into her bones, until staying became its own kind of pain. The walk back to the cabin felt longer than any trail she'd ever taken. The landscape hadn't changed. The same trees, the same slope, the same old stump she used as a landmark. But everything looked slightly out of focus, like the world was still rearranging itself after a truth she hadn't asked for. Inside, the silence felt different. He was everywhere, in the empty space near the fireplace, in the muddy paw prints half faded on the floor, in the worn spot on the rug where he liked to sleep. She sat down heavily and let herself weep without restraint. Grief came in quiet waves after that. It wasn't the violent, choking kind that had followed her husband's death. It was softer, stranger. She would reach out absent-mindedly while stirring a pot, expecting fur to brush her hand and grasp only air. She would step outside to chop wood and glance toward the ridge, half expecting a familiar gray and white figure trotting up the path. Every time, reality reminded her, he wasn't hers to expect. He never had been. At night, she left the door unlatched, a habit her rational mind mocked and her heart refused to break. Winter loosened its grip slowly. Snow melted into stubborn patches, revealing damp earth and the first brave hints of green. Life returned to the valley in cautious degrees. Rivers thawed, birds called again, and distant avalanche rumbles were replaced by the constant, low murmur of runoff. Mara moved through her routines with steady hands and quieter eyes. She chopped wood, mended fences, checked traps, and spoke less to empty rooms. Still, sometimes when wind threaded through the pines just right, she heard a note woven into it that didn't belong to weather. A low, familiar sound, almost like a call. News drifted up the mountain with the mail truck and the occasional neighbor. Strange stories at first. A rancher down in the lower valley swore a mountain lion had been driven off his herd by a ghost wolf that appeared out of nowhere and vanished just as quickly. A hunter found his injured dog gently herded back toward the trail rather than torn apart, like some enormous predator had chosen mercy over instinct. People shrugged, laughed, blamed whiskey and imagination. But Mara listened carefully, heart tightening around each rumor like it was a fragment of a hidden map. She kept Ash's old collar, never worn, just bought on a hopeful day, hanging by the door. It was a silent promise she didn't fully understand. At night, she would sometimes step onto the porch, mug of tea warming her hands, and stare at the dark tree line. The valley lights glowed faintly below, but her eyes always drifted higher, searching the ridge. "You're all right out there," she murmured sometimes, as if he could hear through the miles and snow. The mountains answered only with wind, yet somewhere in that vast emptiness, a part of her believed he heard. The first sign that something had truly changed came with tracks. Not the massive clawed ones she'd seen months ago, not Ash's familiar prints, but a strange combination of both, huge, precise, and walking a line that skirted every human dwelling by careful wide arcs. She found them one morning near her upper boundary fence. They hadn't crossed onto her land. They'd stopped just short, turned, and moved along the ridge. Respectful, intentional, like something wild was drawing a border around her and choosing not to cross it. Her breath caught, protection, not avoidance. Spring crept higher into the mountains, bringing a fragile sense of relief. But with the thaw came different dangers. Poachers started using the old logging road again. Strangers with loud engines and heavy rifles, seeing the awakening wildlife not as neighbors, but as trophies. Mara heard shots echo through the valley more often now, sharp and cruel. She reported what she could to the small-town sheriff, but enforcement up here was as thin as the air. One afternoon, she found a snare hidden near a game trail, illegal, crude, vicious. Her hands shook as she dismantled it. That night, the forest felt restless. The wind shifted scents in uneasy patterns. Ravens flew erratically, scolding invisible threats. Mara loaded her rifle and kept the lantern low, watching the line where trees met clearing like it might step closer at any moment. Rowan had once been her silent companion during storms like this, but now she faced the dark alone. She went to bed fully dressed, boots near the door, gun by the wall. Sleep didn't come, only a faint sense of something holding its breath, waiting. The same feeling she'd had the morning she first met Ash. The attack came just before dawn. It wasn't nature, it was men. The sound of a truck grinding up the unplowed track yanked her from a thin slice of troubled sleep. Headlights cut through the trees, too bright and too loud for the delicate gray light of early morning. 3 silhouettes spilled out, broad shoulders, heavy jackets, the metal glint of rifles, and something nastier in their posture. Entitlement. They weren't hikers. They were hunting something they didn't understand. And if they'd come this high, they were either desperate or sure no one would stop them. Neither option was good. Mara watched from a narrow slit in the curtain as they surveyed her clearing like it was just another piece of land they could trample. One knocked on her door, more as a formality than a request. She didn't answer. He laughed, a sound with no warmth. "Looks empty," he called to the others. "Perfect staging spot." Another man unloaded equipment, heavy traps, chains, something that gleamed like reinforced cable. A chill slid down Mara's spine. They weren't after deer or elk. They were building a cage big enough for something else, something like Ash, or whatever he had become. She could have stayed hidden, waited them out, let them pass like a storm. But the sight of those cables, the memory of Ash's scar, something inside her broke. She stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand, but pointed at the ground. "You're trespassing," she called, voice steady despite the adrenaline shaking her bones. The men turned slowly, sizing her up. One smirked. "Didn't think anyone lived this far up," he said. "We're just passing through, lady, doing some wildlife control." The way he said it twisted her stomach. Control was not the same as respect. "You're not setting those here," she said, nodding toward the traps. "This is my land." The smirk deepened. "Last I checked, the forest doesn't belong to you." His partner added, "There's a bounty on whatever's been roaming up here. Big one. You should be thanking us." Mara's fingers tensed around the rifle stock. A flash of memory. Ash hurling himself under a falling ladder. Ash pacing the cabin during storms. Ash pressing his head into her chest when grief stole her voice. "You set those," she said quietly, "and you're the ones who won't make it down." The leader's expression cooled. The air between them thinned, sharp as shattered ice. "Is that a threat?" he asked calmly. Mara didn't answer. She didn't have to. Her stance said enough. The man took a step closer, hand drifting near his holster. "You can't protect everything out here," he continued. "Whatever's roaming these mountains, it's dangerous. It killed a man 2 valleys over, tore him apart. You think it's going to spare you because you talk to birds?" Doubt pricked at her, quick and cruel. Had Ash done that? Or something like him? The mountains rarely told their stories in full. Her silence stretched a fraction too long. The leader nodded, like her hesitation was an answer. "We'll set what we need," he said. "Stay out of the way." He turned his back on her, and something in her snapped. "You don't understand," she said, voice shaking now, not with fear, but with urgency. "Whatever you're hunting isn't just some animal. It's—" She faltered. What was Ash now? Protector? Predator? Both? The men didn't care. One dropped a trap onto the ground with a heavy thud. Metal teeth gleamed. The sound echoed like a verdict. The forest seemed to flinch. The first howl shattered the tension like glass. It rolled down from the ridge, deep, layered, impossibly vast. Not a lone call, but a chorus woven around a single dominant voice. Mara's throat tightened. She knew that voice. Even grown, even changed, she recognized the cadence. Ash. Snow trembled on branches. Birds exploded into the air. The men froze, bravado dripping from their faces as primal instinct seized their bones. "What the hell was that?" one whispered. The leader recovered quickly, anger hardening his features. "Exactly what we came for," he said, lifting his rifle. "Positions, now." Mara stepped backward slowly, retreating toward the cabin. She wasn't afraid of the howl. She was afraid of what would happen when wildness met gunpowder and ego. She bolted the door, then moved to the back window, watching the tree line. The men spread out clumsily, well-armed but ignorant of the terrain. They set a trap near her fence, another near the start of the ridge trail, and one horribly close to the narrow pass that led toward the place she had last seen Ash vanish into the mist. Her stomach twisted. This wasn't hunting. It was ambush. The forest held its breath. For long minutes, nothing moved. The men shifted occasionally, stamping their feet, adjusting grips on their rifles. One muttered about the cold. Another checked his phone uselessly. There was no signal this high. Then, at the edge of the clearing, a shape appeared. Massive, gray-white, silent, not barreling in, not charging blindly. Observing, assessing. Ash, fully grown now, shoulders higher than a man's chest, fur thick and scarred by a life lived at the top of the food chain. His eyes glowed that familiar gold. They swept the clearing and found her window first. For one suspended heartbeat, the world narrowed to that line of sight. Mara felt the years fold between them, like pages closing. She saw recognition there, not just of her face, but of the life they'd shared. Then his gaze flicked to the men, to the metal teeth buried in snow, to the guns. The fur along his spine rose slightly. He didn't roar. He didn't howl. He simply stepped sideways, circling, never taking the bait, always staying just beyond rifle range. The men grew frustrated, shouting, calling to each other, their movements growing sloppier with every minute. One of them, in a burst of impatience, fired. The shot cracked through the morning, punching a hole through a distant tree. Birds scattered. Ash darted behind cover, movement so fluid it barely disturbed the snow. Another shot followed, then another, each one more reckless than the last. Mara's hands dug into the windowsill hard enough to hurt. "Stop," she whispered, though no one heard. The men pushed forward, too focused on the lure of bounty to notice they were being herded, slowly, carefully, into a tighter cluster near the center of the clearing. Ash stepped from behind a fallen log, closer now. Not close enough to touch the traps, but close enough to draw every eye. His lips curled back, revealing teeth that could crush bone. He growled, not a warning, but a command. Behind him, movement flickered in the trees. Another shape, then another, smaller than Ash, but similar in form. A pack. Not dozens, but enough. Ash hadn't just gone back to the wild. He'd risen in it. The realization hit Mara with something like awe. The men finally saw the others. Their bravado collapsed into raw animal fear. The leader shouted, "Back to the truck!" His voice wavered. One man stumbled in his haste, and his boot landed squarely in one of his own traps. Metal snapped shut around his leg with a sickening crunch. His screams sliced through the air, high and ragged. The pack surged forward instinctively, predatory hunger flashing in their eyes. Ash moved faster. He cut in front of them with a booming bark, snapping at their faces until they hesitated, confused. Then he did something Mara had never seen an animal do. He turned his back on the wounded man, and instead faced her cabin. Their gazes met again. In his eyes, she saw a question, a memory, a choice. Mara understood. Slowly, heart pounding, she stepped onto the porch, hands held out to show she carried no weapon. The pack tensed, unsure. Ash rumbled low, keeping them in check. She walked toward the trapped man, who stared at her with a mix of terror and desperate hope. "Don't," he choked. She knelt anyway, ignoring the blood, the stench of fear. "You stepped into your own trap," she said quietly. "You want to live? Then you leave this mountain as it is, all of you." Ash held the pack back while she pried the trap open with trembling, furious hands. The man sobbed as he dragged his leg free, pain and shame mingling. His leader helped him up, eyes never leaving Ash. Then Mara. "You had your warning," she said, voice steady despite everything inside her shaking. "There won't be another." The men limped to their truck, fear carving grooves into their faces. The engine roared, then faded down the road. Silence returned, softer this time. Ash watched until they vanished, then turned to her. For a moment, the wild and the human stood inches apart, bound by a shared history that defied logic. He dipped his massive head once. An acknowledgement, a thank you, a goodbye all at once, then melted back into the trees, his pack flowing after him like mist. The mountains exhaled, and Mara understood, in a way she never had before, that loving something wild doesn't end when it leaves. Sometimes, if you're lucky, it comes back just long enough to remind you why you believed in it in the first place.